So, what's the best story you have ever heard or watched? What's the best story you've ever heard? What's your favorite story? It can be a movie, it can be a book. What is the best story you've ever engaged with? So here's what I want you to do. Think about that for 2 seconds, and then turn to somebody close to you. Best story you've ever read or watched. On your mark and set, go. All right, so that shouldn't take long. You got it? Just in case you need to know Brady Bramlett, his favorite story is The Green Mile, a story of a really massive guy with special talents. So it kind of fits for Brady. Mine, if you hadn't read it, mine is Lord of the Flies. And if you don't like it, you don't know about it, we'll talk at lunch about that one today. But what makes a story great? You ever stop to think about that? Is it just that there's a beginning and an end? It's not what it is. Is it that there are just people in the story? No, what makes a story great is the struggle. What makes the story great is that there are these compelling characters in the midst of the story who suffer and they go through failures and they try to overcome something. And usually the best stories are stories where at the end there's triumph, there's victory, there's new life, there's redemption. That's what makes a great story. And here's the thing. I think the story of Ruth in the Bible is probably one of the greatest stories for those reasons. In the story, you've got tragedy, you've got problems, but you also have this amazing friendship between two women that should not be as they go through this journey to redemption in life. And think about these two women. They shouldn't have been friends. You've got an older woman and a younger woman from different generations. They come from different countries. It was a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and not every mother-in-law and daughter-in-law end up great friends. Some of these folks can attest to maybe that. But still, they journeyed together all the way to the moment at the very end. If you read all the way to the end of the book, this story of redemption. So let me remind you of this story just in case you're blanking on it, just in case you've never read it. It's 85 verses, so you can read this book in almost no time. If you chose to, you could read it while I preach. It might be more beneficial for you. Just pull the Bible, read that. But let me remind you of the story. Let me remind you what happened. At the beginning of the story, we meet Naomi and Elimelech and their two sons. And we find out that there's a famine. Already there's a problem right in the first verse of the book. There's a problem, there's famine. And they're from Bethlehem. Anybody know what the name Bethlehem means? House of bread. One of our confirmands knew that. So you didn't know that, but I told you, it's the best class ever. A house of bread. So the irony there is that these people are in the house of bread, and there's no bread in the house of bread. So they have to go. And they choose a strange place to go. They go to a place called Moab. Moab was a country that the Israelites didn't like. They were always fighting. They were in competition with each other. And the truth of the matter is the Israelites looked down at the Moabites. Imagine this. Imagine the person that in your mind you just don't like. You just don't like them for whatever reason. And imagine if you had to go to that person and ask for help. That's what Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons have to do when they go to Moab. They have to ask these people that they don't like for help. And they get it, and they live there. Everything works out okay for them. But in verse 3, we meet tragedy. Elimelech dies. But Naomi's okay because she has her two sons. She still has her two sons to provide for her. We hear that the two sons marry Moabite women. So we've got these Israelite men marrying Moabite women. One's named Orpah and one is named Ruth. And the story goes on for about 10 years. But after 10 years, here's what happens. Naomi's two sons tragically die. And this is an absolute disaster for all sorts of reasons. Part of the disaster is because of the grief. Naomi has lost everyone that she has loved in this life. The other part of the disaster is because women in that day and time, in that culture, if they weren't attached to a man, then they were vulnerable. They were at the mercy of whoever they met to feed them or not feed them, to take advantage of them or not take advantage of them. So Naomi and Ruth and Orpah are in trouble. They don't have a safety net. Naomi hears that Bethlehem, the house of bread, has bread again. So she decides she's going home. And Orpah and Ruth start on the journey with her. But here's what happens. Naomi, at some point in the journey before they get very far, she realizes that taking these two Moabite women back with her to Israel, probably not a good idea. She's going to struggle to get food. She's going to struggle to live when she gets back to her people in Israel. Probably would be better if she didn't bring in tow two more mouths to feed, particularly because they were from Moab. So she turns to them. And this is what she says to them. Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So she tells them, go home. Go back to your mom's house. Maybe you can find people to take care of you there, but I can't take care of you in Israel. So do you know what they do? Do they go back? They confirm, maybe, sort of. They don't go back. They cling to Naomi. They cry. They don't want to leave. So Naomi, what she does is she tells them, look, there's no future. If you stay with me, there's absolutely no future with me. I can't promise you anything in Israel. I can't promise you that we'll have a place to live. I can't promise you that there'll be food. I can't promise you that you'll find someone to marry and take care of you. I have no future. Leave me. And so Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, leaves her. She goes back home. And before you start thinking, oh, Orpah made the wrong decision, she made the right choice. She made the common sense choice. She made the choice that any one of us would make in that situation. She followed the direction and the instruction of her mother-in-law. And she goes home. But Ruth won't go home. She cries and clings to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And this is what Naomi says to Ruth. See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. One more time, Naomi says, get away from me. This is not a kindness. She's saying, go away from me. But here's Ruth's response. Some of the most famous words in all of the Old Testament. Ruth says, do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. And after that, Naomi gives up. She lets Ruth travel with her back to Bethlehem. Now, those words are beautiful, but where do we typically hear those words spoken? Where at? At weddings, right? We hear those words of Ruth at weddings. In this moment where it's beautiful and hopeful in the beginning of this great journey. But that's not when the words were originally spoken. These words were spoken when everything had gone wrong. These words were spoken when nothing was right, when everything was lost, everything was broken. Nothing good was in the future. And yet what Ruth does for Naomi is more than say, I'm going to travel with you. And here's what Ruth really says to Naomi. No, Ruth says, I'm committing to your uncertain future no matter what, even if it costs me everything. And that's the extraordinary gift. And I think that's why we're drawn to this story. Because we realize somewhere deep down that we need relationships like that. We need friendships like that. We need people in our lives who give us that extraordinary gift. And as we travel through life and as you move through life, there are going to be opportunities for you to live as that kind of extraordinary gift for others. I think part of what we claim at our best as the church is we're a place where we travel with people offering them a future. And we look for those kinds of relationships. A guy named Ben Quash wrote this. He said, human relationships are like knots tied in the fabric of life. I like that image, don't you? Knots tied in the fabric of life to help hold it together as a net or web which is sustaining and permits human flourishing. We need those kinds of friendships. When we gather as the church, part of what we are committing to one another is to be extraordinary gifts for each other. But I want to make sure that we understand on this day, and on this day when you're committing to the church, that you understand what's required of that. And that takes me to the story of the 4 nuns. In 1878, Memphis, Tennessee experienced a plague, yellow fever. It wasn't their first, it wouldn't be their last, but this one was the worst. Over 5,100 people died in 1878 in Memphis from the yellow fever. In fact, for a little while, because of the people who had fled the city and all the people who had died, the charter to the city got pulled. It wasn't a city anymore because so many people were gone. When yellow fever broke out, here's what happened. Everybody left. Everybody who could left. And they left behind their neighbors. They left behind their family members. They left behind their friends in order to save their own lives. They left behind people dying in Memphis. But there was this group of nuns who worked at St. Mary's School for Girls. And here's what they decided to do. Instead of fleeing the city with everybody else, they moved in. They moved into the neighborhoods where people were sick. They moved into the homes where people were sick. They were there with them, giving them the gift of a future with hope. And they knew when they did that it could potentially cost them everything. After the plague was over, you find diary entries and news articles about the gift of this group of nuns. 4 of those nuns gave their life. It was costly for them. In order to walk with people into a future, it cost them everything. And I think what we need to know and what we need to remember is that if we're going to be that kind of people as the church, if we're going to be those kinds of people who give this extraordinary gift of friendship, then we need to be ready for it to cost us. I think in our world today, most of the time we don't think about our friendships or our relationships costing us much. We do relationships at a distance. We do friendships through Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. We wish people a happy birthday once a year when it pops up, and we think we've done something. But what the story of Ruth reminds us of is that there are these times in life, not all the time, but there are these moments in life where we have to commit ourselves in a way that costs us something. It may cost us time. And I tell you, we don't have a whole lot of extra time, do we? You don't. I know you, all of you. I saw your schedules as you were trying to figure out how to come to retreats and come on Wednesday nights and go to do different things with the confirmation class. You're busy. All of us are busy people. But sometimes it costs us time to be the extraordinary gift. Sometimes it might cost us our resources or our money. It might cost us our reputation. Sometimes to step into someone's life who needs you. I think what the story of Ruth and Naomi shows us that there are moments in life, opportunities, whether there's brokenness or failure or loss or grief or pain or shame, when we're called to step into to live out that kind of relationship. And what that means sometimes for us, sometimes we're Naomi. Sometimes we're Naomi. Sometimes our lives have just fallen apart, and we need to let our guard down. We need to set aside our pride. We need to set aside all of that, thinking that we don't need other people. We can do this on our own and let other people in. And at other times, and in moments, we need to be people who are willing to step in, whether that's just with a word saying, I'm not going to leave you. We can't do it for everyone. You can't do that for everyone. But there are moments when you're called to step into someone's life. And in congregation, let me speak to you for just a moment. We're confirming these young men and women today, and you're going to make a commitment to them just as you did at their baptisms. And here's what I would say to you. This is your opportunity to step in. Maybe when it costs you something. Maybe when it costs you time on Sunday nights or Wednesday nights because you're going to talk to Jonathan and say, I want to be a part of our student ministry here at OU. Maybe you know some of these young adults already, and it's time for you to step into their lives in a more significant way. Because here's what happens. Because here's what happened in the story of Ruth. When Ruth was willing to live as an extraordinary gift, sacrificing, doing things that cost her, here's what happened to Naomi. God's work of redemption showed up in Naomi's life. At the end of the story, when you get to the end of the story, the book of Ruth, you don't find great things being said about Ruth. They're all said about Naomi. It says this, Naomi was redeemed. Why was Naomi redeemed? Because God worked through the extraordinary gift of Ruth. That's the power when we give ourselves to others. Which takes me to the story of the long trip, the last story. About 10 years ago, I made the long trip from Hattiesburg to Little Rock. And it's a long trip because there's no straight way from Hattiesburg to Little Rock. It took me forever to get to Little Rock. But I needed to go see someone, to go see a friend one more time. He was suffering from post-polio syndrome. When he was a little boy, before there were vaccines, he contracted polio. And he managed to fight it off and live this long, flourishing life. He did a lot of amazing things. But in his last years, the polio came back. Took his ability to walk. It gave him shakes in the hands. He had always been a lover of music and a singer. It took his ability to sing. It took years off of his life. But I had to go so I could thank him one more time. His name was Richard Hunter. And I met him when I was a freshman at Ole Miss. Here's what happened when I was a freshman at Ole Miss. My parents, their marriage fell apart. They separated and divorced when I was a freshman. And it completely turned my world upside down. I didn't know about my calling. I'd already kind of set out on this calling, but I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure about my major. I wasn't sure how I was going to finish paying for Ole Miss. My car was a victim of the divorce. I lost my car, so I was a college student without a car. Everything was up for grabs. It was Richard Hunter who stepped into my life and said, I'm walking with you through this. It was Richard Hunter and his wife Betty who invited me to lunch every Sunday after church. He wrote me handwritten notes of encouragement. Nobody writes notes anymore, but here's what I'm here to tell you. Write somebody a note this week. Don't text them. Write them a note. That's what he did for me. He arranged for me to get a car as part of his gift to me. A car that I didn't have to pay for. Everything I needed from that point forward, Richard made sure that I had. And if you asked him about it, he would have said, I didn't do anything. I didn't do a thing, Eddie. I just did what I could for you. Here's what Richard really did for me. Richard allowed God's work of redemption in life to take place in my life. He opened that door for me. And there are going to be moments in life in your next 70 or 80 years where you have the opportunity to do things that don't feel like much to you, but open the door for God's redemption and hope to take root and to go to bring life again. So here's what I challenge you to do. Take courage. Set aside your fear. Keep your eyes open for the moments and the people who need you. It won't be everyone, but someone in your path needs you. Needs your extraordinary gift so that God's work of redemption can come to life. Let me pray for you. God, we step into the church sometimes and we're not sure what it means. But part of what it means, God, is that we commit to being a part of the body together, living for one another and with one another, offering one another what we have, and trusting that in moments our gift to the other will be an extraordinary gift, and trusting that in moments the gift of presence, promise, gift of resources in a way that we don't understand will open up the way for your redemption to take place. So God, give us courage, give us hope to do the work of your church. In the name of Christ we pray.